Welcome to You First Daily. It's day 3 of AIDS 2020 virtual. I'm Moises, joining you from Argentina. Today we will talk to youth leaders from around the world, plus we'll share highlights from the conference to help you pinpoint resources that are online and on demand that best suits you. Now with recaps from the Global Village is my colleague, Aron.
Thanks, and I'm here to share the Global Village highlights of the day. I hope you're enjoying AIDS 2020 virtual. Today, we have some amazing activities on the agenda. Many identities, one voice. LGBTQIA plus youth united against HIV features stories from a diverse group of advocates and people living with HIV. Plus, there will be a live interactive hour where you can chat with some of the storytellers. Art HIVism is based on the real experiences of visual artist Adriana Bertini, who mobilized more than 3,000 young people in the São Paulo, Brazil in 2019. The exhibit aims to empower young people to foster social change. Check them out, and don't miss their documentary on Netflix. The King of the Contraceptive Kenya. It's not Tiger King, but Stanley Nagara is the king of condoms, who uses humor and empathy to spread awareness of safe sex in Kenya. Those are just some of the highlights today. Be sure to check them out and join the conversation at the Youth Cafe.
Thanks, Aron. AIDS 2020 Virtual is all about sharing information with people from around the world. Today I'm joined by Tankut, and he sits down with Michael of ACT UP Dublin.
So thanks for the introduction. I would like to start talking about the most recent event that took place in Turkey, which roughly happened a month ago during the first week of the holy month Ramadan. So the first Friday prayer of the holy month Ramadan is very important for Muslim population. And the Minister of Religious Affairs gave a very rather sensational speech. So the minister said that homosexuality and extramarital sex in Turkey is what gives rise to HIV and is what perverts generations. It is very common for societies and for political authorities to produce scapegoats during pandemics. So the very important number is that the number of HIV diagnoses in Turkey has increased 620% since 2007. So this is, according to some sources, including World Health Organization, this is now one of the fastest growing HIV epidemics in the world. However, we see no public health intervention. When there is public health intervention, this only targets straight married couples. Of course, key populations and especially trans and gay people are completely ignored, erased, and invisibilized. And so this is all I was going to say. And we would really like to hear from you, Michael, and especially both like in terms of what is the government's response and government's attitude to HIV, but also what can we learn from how the activists confront the government policies in Ireland.
Okay, so a lot of what you mentioned there about Turkey really reflected what Ireland was like historically. Historically, Ireland is a predominantly Catholic country with a great homogeneity of religion, of about 80% of people identifying as Catholic. So a lot of what you mentioned there was really prominent in Ireland. However, over the last about 10 to 20 years, we've seen great social change with things such as marriage equality and generally the improvement of the lives of LGBTQ plus people. And with that has come a change in the public attitude towards LGBT plus people, especially gay and bi men. And that has been reflected in the government attitude towards GBMSM. Fortunately, we've gotten to see this change in public attitude reflected in the government and their response to LGBT people, especially gay and bi men, and especially in relation to the HIV crisis in Ireland. Similarly, to what is going on in Turkey, Ireland generally neglected and ignored the HIV crisis, which led to rates of HIV going up year after year after year. We've seen great improvements in the government response with the development of the National PrEP Programme, the National Anti-HIV Stigma Campaign, and the Irish government has also signed up to the Fast Track Cities initiative, which is a fantastic action to be seen. But with the history of Ireland's neglect of the HIV crisis in Ireland, Ireland has developed a really strong community-based activism response to the HIV crisis with really strong groups such as ACT UP Dublin, who've really done a huge amount of work in the development of improvements of the services for GB MSM. They've collaborated hugely on the PrEP program and the national anti-stigma campaign, sorry. And yeah, so it really seems like it's moved away from the idea of fighting for our place at the table, but rather we have a place at the table now. We are seen as a respected community, but rather it's about voicing our opinion, informing the government about our needs, and kind of working towards appropriate services for people.
Has there been any cooperation between the activists and the government?
So yeah, there's actually been quite a level of cooperation between the government and activist groups such as ACT UP Dublin. We've been included in the development of the national PrEP program, and the government has been highly receptive of community groups, and it's been fantastic to have the ability to liaise between the community and the government, because it is so important to collect that sort of information from the people, bring it from the bottom up. People's needs get to be reflected in the policies and the services.
So, Michael, I'm really curious about ACT UP Dublin, both about its history, but also its present day functioning. And I am actually also envious that we do not have such a mobilization in Turkey yet.
Not yes. Well, historically, ACT UP Dublin has its roots in the early AIDS and HIV epidemic in Dublin. However, it was redeveloped in 2016 in response to the increasing HIV rates, as people in the community slowly become disenfranchised with the government's response and the neglect to the HIV crisis and the lack of funding. So people have begun to collaborate together and develop ACT UP Dublin. And things that ACT UP Dublin work on is really community liaison, actively engaging with the community and trying to collect data on people's needs, wants, and concerns. Secondly, it's fighting against big pharma greed in Ireland. A big concern of ACT UP Dublin is fighting against big pharma companies such as Gilead, who was trying to protect their patent of PrEP in Ireland, which would have hugely impacted the development of a PrEP program, which, leading on, is another huge thing that ACT UP Dublin was working on. And then the psychosocial needs of people living with HIV, and of course, increased funding for general GB, MSM, well-being services.
And what do you do specifically in ACT UP? Again, like I'm just so curious about this, and I
Yeah, so my background is in psychology. I'm a psychological researcher with my main area around PrEP stigma, and I joined ACT UP, and I got very inspired with my background in psychology to focus on the psychosocial needs of people living with HIV, and from there, kind of collected data on what people are thinking of, and I've actually moved on, and I'm collaborating with the local NGO HIV Ireland on the development of a national peer support program, which is a program where people living with HIV, newly diagnosed, are paired up with somebody who's had HIV for a number of years and who has a bit of training in communication skills, motivational interviewing, treatment literacy. And the whole aim of the program is to really, the vision is to see people living with HIV empowering other people living with HIV to live fulfilled and healthy lives.
So I feel very hopeful after this conversation, actually, especially you mentioned how religious conservatism to a certain extent decreased over time, and this created a space for HIV activism in Ireland.
Thank you so much for saying that. Yeah, I agree that I think Ireland really is a fantastic example of a country that has moved past these cultural taboos to actively engage with the community and community activists in the development of fantastic projects and hopefully improved responses to the HIV crisis.
This gives me a lot of hope. Thanks a lot, Michael, and thanks a lot for joining me today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Activism takes different forms in different countries, but no matter where we live, it's clear that youth are taking the lead in pushing an agenda to create a safer world. Joining me from Bangkok is Ikka from Youth Lead. Thanks for joining us today. Can you please give us a little introduction of yourself and your organization?
My name is Ikka. I will start when I start to work in HIV field. So I started in 2015 when I found my HIV status. So I decided to work as a voluntary in the clinic for sex worker because I'm a sex worker community on that time. So that time I met with the coordinator from the organization from sex worker that she asked me to join them, and I decided to move from Bali. So I'm original from Indonesia, from Bali. So I moved to Jakarta to join the movement. But then 1 year I joined the organization. I feel like I'm alone. I'm the only one young people. So I asked them to refer me to the youth organization. Then I met with the national organization for YKP and joined the movement. And then I finally joined Youth Lead in Bangkok last 2 years. And yeah, Youth Lead is a Asia Pacific network for young key population. So the YKP we serve are young MSM, transgender person, young drugs user, young sex worker, and young people living with HIV. So Youth Lead start with from the small project on 2010, but then 4 years we process we run our organization, and then on to 2014 we finally legally registered in Thai as a Thai foundation.
That's great. What are some examples of your work on the ground? What do you guys do?
From my side, what I do is I join in Youth Lead as an advocacy officer. So basically, what I do is do meeting with the stakeholder and also discuss with our country partner, because currently we work with the 22 organization member in the country level. So what we did, it's first is advocacy. So we did the age of consent because currently the age of consent in Asia and Pacific are challenging, and also advocacy for inclusion and meaningful representation of YKP. We do advocacy in the Global Fund process, also capacity building. We do individual capacity building and organization. So what we do with individual, we give them kind of leadership training, or we develop the training manuals to capacitate the individual leaders. And also we do organizational development support for YKP-led organization.
And how can our viewers join or support your organization?
Yeah, as I said, we work through the individual focal points and also organizational led by YKP. So we highly request for the Yankee population out there, or young people living with HIV in the region, to be part of Youth Lead and join the YKP movement in regional or globally. And also, currently, we depend on the external resource. So we would also request support through the individual funders.
Thank you, Ikka, for being here, and goodbye.
Yeah, thank you so much, Moises, for having me here, and goodbye.
Gareth Thomas is a legendary British rugby player. In 2009, Gareth came out as a gay man. 10 years later, in 2019, he publicly disclosed his HIV status. Gareth's revelations have inspired those living in secret that they are not alone. And today, Umair sits down with Gareth.
Thank you. So, you had a successful career as a sports person and are now successfully carving out a role as a HIV activist, breaking down barriers and challenging stigmatizing views. How have you found this change, and what has been the most surprising aspect of this direction your life has now taken?
I think the biggest surprise or difference that my life has taken, the route it's gone, is that I never expected my life to go down this route. But what I did learn from playing professional sport for so many years, I learned so many great values that stood me in good stead to deal with the barriers and the obstacles that I had to overcome to be open about my HIV status. And what I also learned from sport is I learned to deal with fear. I learned to deal with being afraid. And trust me, before I was open about my status, about living with HIV, I was very much afraid. And that's probably a reason why I lied to so many people for so many years. But what I quickly learned from rugby, or from the sport I played, was that fear is a really good motivator for overcoming the thing you're afraid of. So when I finally overcame my fear of telling people about my HIV status, I really felt like I'd achieved something because I'd overcome that fear. And within sport, within professional sport, kind of every day is a fear. Every time you're playing against an opposition, there's an element of fear based in it. So rugby stood me in good stead to deal with the life and what I represent now.
Well, it's really inspiring for me that how it has helped you, sports values. But as a sports sociologist, I want to ask you more, like, it really helped you, but you are a role model, a rugby role model. But do you think like the sports programs and social sports programs we have been running, are they effective in breaking down the stigma and discrimination of HIV and for the LGBTQ plus community? Like how it's beneficial for other young people?
Well, I feel sport is a really good platform. Sport is a really powerful, positive way of creating a purpose. It's a way of gaining friendships. It's a way of gaining camaraderies. It's also a form of building trust. So for me, with my team, even though my trust was built around the ability of people to be able to play the sport and to be able to do great for each other in really precious moments and special times, sometimes that transcends the sport and that becomes part of who people are, and people become very committed people become very honest people become very hardworking people. So sport for me is a great way of people being able to fulfill their dreams, fulfill their abilities, and also learn great values that when they are potentially not part of sport, what sport taught them in the fight in the real world or for the fight in society comes into play in there as well.
Different rugby values such as teamwork, respect, enjoyment, discipline. How particularly these values help people? How can these adopt and evolve to ensure that inclusiveness is added for sports people who are stigmatized against because of their sexual orientation, health status, and etc.?
Well, I think when you look at sporting values, just like when you look at human values, they're usually really good values, and people want to be associated with good values. So then when you talk about stigma, when you talk about discrimination, it takes people with values, it takes people with courage, it takes people with honesty, it takes people with ambition, all these values that you associate with sports people, or all these values I associated with rugby players in my case. You look at all them, and those are all the opposite values to people who live by thinking discrimination is okay, or by thinking that stigmatization is okay. So the values that sport gave me and the values that sport gives people are the values that fight against people who live on the negative side, or who live on the side of stigma, live on the side of discrimination.
I totally agree with your points. I also believe sports has an immense power. Lastly, I would like to know what message you like to share with young people, particularly younger one living with HIV and other people from different age backgrounds.
I think for me, a message to younger people living with HIV is to understand that everything you say, everything you do becomes part of your legacy. And it's one of the most important things I feel in life is what you do, make it purposeful, make it worthwhile, make it be something that creates a legacy that when you're no longer around, when you're no longer a youngster, the legacy you've left behind has created a better environment than it was the one that you was already in.
Thank you, Gareth, for joining us today.
Goodbye, my friend.
Umair, thank you for bringing that to us. Gareth, thank you for publicly fighting HIV stigma. Each day, we end the show by sitting down with youth leaders from around the world. I am now joined by Keren from ICW Latina, a global organization for women living with HIV. Hello, Keren. How are you?
I'm excited to be here and to be part of the broadcast. Thank you for inviting me.
Can you talk a bit about the HIV response in Honduras, your country, and do you feel the response has been or is effective, and why?
What I can tell you is that I strive every day to know the needs of most vulnerable populations affected by the HIV pandemic and to propose actions to other organizations on civil society such as ICW and the Javits Foundation, a foundation that my parents created 20 years ago. There are many organizations that are taking actions throughout the region with immediate and affirmative actions. And there has been a lot of changes, but the work is not over.
Are people informed about PrEP, PEP, EU equals EU? We know the region has been facing a lot of issues, political issues, but can you say that people are informed? What do you think about it?
Many countries now with the PrEP are using the same discourse, the same statements when we were fighting for the therapy. Like we can give all the money to prevention. We can give all the money on drugs when the PrEP is the only strategy that until now has been shown scientifically that can stop new infections. But now in Central America, I think that only Costa Rica is investing in it. In Honduras, that priority is given to a few therapies. We just have a few, not a lot, PrEP therapies for doctors who have suffered a high-risk accident at work. And U equals U, it's still a taboo. There's a lot of misinformation. We are not there yet.
And in sticking with AIDS 2020 conference theme, what are ways in which organizations can promote resilience among youth?
Wow, resilience. Resilience is a word that has been a big part of my life. And I think in a lot of part of the lives of other young people, especially the ones who got the HIV when they were 15 to 20, it's to let all the myth of HIV get lower, to spread the message that HIV is not a death sentence, to know that we can live a normal life with HIV. Sometimes I even forget that I have HIV because us people with HIV, we can do whatever. O sea, I mean, we can be mothers, we can breastfeed, we can get married, we can have a profession, we can do a lot of things. And that's one of the base of, for my personal activism, is to know that HIV is not an obstacle. And even though, yes, it's scary to get an HIV positive test in your hands, it's not the end. And that's what resilience means. This is not the end, and you can still get up and fight.
Thank you, Keren. Thank you.
Oh, it was a pleasure. I really love it.
Thank you so much for joining us. Please be sure to watch again tomorrow and keep the conversation going online at the Youth Cafe. And I cannot finish without saying Fora Bolsonaro.